You hear me now? Okay, excellent. I'm Malik, faculty at Tufts. I'll be talking about using AI to reduce flood risk for vulnerable households in Bihar. This is joint work with my excellent co-author, Rohini Pandey, who's at Yale University. So this is sort of like a good news, bad news, good news project. The good news is AI-based flood early warning systems are amazing. They generate really accurate forecasts in a timely fashion, and include information that people actually demand from the flood alerts. So that's great. The bad news is that just generating forecasts is not enough if they don't reach people who are impacted by floods. And that's essentially what we show, is that these forecasts don't really reach rural Bihari households. So that's the bad news. But the second piece of good news is that this is a problem that's solvable through last mile delivery models. And I'll show you results using two different types of last mile delivery models, one that didn't work and one that did work. So climate change is escalating flood risk globally. Since the 1980s, the flood risk has quadrupled, and today it affects like 1 in 4 people. India is one of the most flood-prone countries in the world. Close to 390 million people in India are susceptible to flood risk. And within India, Bihar is India's most flood-prone state. It includes 18% of India's flood-prone area. So what you see on the slide here is a map of Bihar across 3 different time periods, 1984 to 95, 96 to 2008, and then 2009 to 2011. And the shades of blue, the blue bit indicates areas that face flooding in each of those time periods. And the deeper the shade of blue, it indicates the frequency of flooding in each of those time periods. And what you see here is that the spatial extent of flooding has increased dramatically in the last 20, 25 years. And what you also see is the frequency of flooding has increased dramatically. So you see much more deeper shades of blue in the 2009 to 2021 period relative to 1996 to 2008 and the 1984 to 1995 period, just indicating this escalation of flood risk in Bihar. And these floods are highly disruptive. So this is data we collected from households after the 2019 flood season. We asked them how flooding in 2019 affected them. And over 50% of people said that it decreased harvest and increased sickness in the household. Close to 25% said it damaged their house, loss of livestock, and damage to goods, right? So the floods, riverine floods, we're talking about freshwater floods, they're highly damaging to both lives and livelihoods in Bihar. What's the policy solution that can be designed? Well, one policy solution is flood early warning systems. However, before middle of 2010s, the flood early warning systems available to rural Bihari populations or just rural populations in India or even urban populations in India were quite archaic. So the CWC, which is the Central Water Commission, is the nodal authority responsible for generating and disseminating forecasts in India. They generated alerts through like these manual gauge readers that observed river levels at stations and then transmitted the data via wireless radio to divisional flood control programs. And then the forecasts were derived through like simple correlations where upstream water level predicted downstream water level with a lag, right? And these were then disseminated via like district or state level bulletins, via wireless, fax, press, radio, TV. There was no like last mile delivery, although the police were part of the chain. So that meant that rural Bihari households relied on some fragments of this information that the CWC was trying to disseminate together with like indigenous knowledge. So they look at water levels, look at the color of the water, or maybe rely on some informal community warnings which might not be as accurate. And then they would triangulate all of these things to like predict when flooding would happen in their communities, right? So this is like this is pre-AI world, not a very good flood early warning system. Now, today, the Indian government has like an amazing machine learning / AI-based flood early warning system. They record hourly water levels at over thousands of gauges across the river system in India. And the data is then transmitted to in real time to forecasting stations that are equipped with like modeling systems. So then they generate these basin level forecasts that leverage this rainfall runoff modeling framework to generate really highly accurate forecasts 2 to 5 days before the floods are predicted to arrive. So this is a graph that shows you the correlation between actual water levels and forecasted water levels above a certain predefined threshold. And the 45-degree line indicates a perfect correlation between actual and forecasted water level. And you see the dots, the bin scatter plots, are pretty close to the 45-degree line, which suggests that the CWC alerts are highly accurate. Their accuracy is over 95%. And this is, as I said, is an AI-based early warning system. In terms of dissemination, still, they rely on these state or district-level warnings. They're released via TV, radio, SMS, newspapers, and websites. Another early warning system that's available to people in India and much of the developing world is like Google's flood early warning system. Again, this is an AI-based early warning system. It uses AI to operate a hydraulic model that combines two things. One is these real-time water levels that CWC collects, and the second is a digital elevation maps. And combine these two things to release like these highly accurate 2 to 5 day advance warnings. There are two key differences of Google's early warning system compared to the CWC early warning system. One is that they generate flood risk map, which are quite granular, and they can tell you where you are relative to where the risk of flooding is quite severe. So that's pretty awesome. And then the dissemination is done with a hyper-local precision. So unlike CWC or this Indian government, which just sends out these warnings blanket to everyone in a district or a state, Google's warnings are highly targeted, and they're sent to people who Google predicts is going to be affected by flooding, so which is pretty awesome. And in terms of accuracy, their model also performs pretty well, is as good, if not better, than CWC's model. So that's great. So it's accurate, it's timely, it's delivering information that people need. That's great. However, the problem is that people actually don't get these alerts. So when you ask people if you received alerts from the CWC or Google, and I'll show you this, less than 20% said they actually do receive the alerts, right? Just generating alerts is not enough for impact. What you need is for actually people who are going to be impacted by flooding to actually receive those alerts, trust those alerts, and then take action in response to those alerts, right? So this is, I'll show you some data now from a survey that we have been doing for the last 4 years. After each flood season, we contact 5,500 households. And we asked them about flooding, how it's affected them, if they received alerts, what alerts they received, and the impacts of these, of alerts as well as impacts of flooding. So what you see here is 4 bars for each of the years, and we asked them if their community was flooded. This is a flood-prone sample, so these are 160 flood-prone panchayats where this data is coming from, across 12 Bihari districts. And what you see is that flooding is quite pervasive every year, right? So there hasn't been a year in the last 4 years where fewer than 60% have said that they have not been affected by flooding, right? It's pretty pervasive. In 2025, close to 75% of households reported their community was flooded. And forecasts have been generated. So the second bar is showing you if the forecasts were generated for these 160 communities. And what you see is in 2022, for the vast majority of areas where these households live, the forecasts were generated. In 23, 24, and 25, they were also generated for areas that were not flooded. Well, this is a function of the model. They're trying to minimize the risk of false negatives, which is they're trying to minimize instances of there being a flood, but there not being an alert. And the trade-off or the cost is you have instances of there being an alert, but there not being a flood. So false positives, right? So that's what you see in 23, 24, and 25, that they ended up sending alerts to areas that actually eventually did not get flooded, okay? But the key takeaway here is that these forecasts are being released for communities that are being flooded, which is great. However, when we ask people after flooding if they received alerts from the CWC or received alerts via modes that the CWC uses to send out alerts, as you see here, no more than 20% of people say that they received these alerts that the Central Water Commission sends, right? So in 22, it was close to 5%, 23, 10%, and then around 18% in 24 and 25. When we asked them if they received alerts from Google, we asked this question in 24 and 25 after those flood seasons. They received alert directly from Google via these Android notifications. Again, no more than 15 or 20% people say that they receive these alerts, right? So although these alerts are being generated, they don't get to people who need them the most, right? And even if then we ask them if they like any source, do you receive alerts from any source? This includes sources that are not very accurate. So these are like, maybe you heard a rumor or the boatman is telling you that river water levels are rising. So even those sort of sources, even if you add all of that up, you still see this gap between percentage of people who are saying their community is flooded and percentage of people who say they received alerts from any source, right? So there's this gap between forecast generation and actually people getting the alerts. Okay, so now the question is how to design a last mile delivery model that bridges this gap between like these amazingly accurate and timely AI-based forecasts and vulnerable people. So the first thing we tried to come up with the delivery model, our intuition was, let's like send these alerts to like Panchayat Mukhya. So who are Panchayat Mukhya? They're like local leaders who are trusted within their communities, and they also have the capacity to disseminate alerts amongst the community members, right? So we designed a community model that essentially said, okay, let's make sure we get these alerts to these local leaders, and then they can do the dissemination, right? So this is what the intervention we tested during the 2019 flood season. Our pilot sample included 77 panchayats or communities across 6 Bihari districts, highlighted in this map here, right here. And to evaluate whether this intervention worked or not, we conducted a survey after the 2019 flood season, and then we compared percentage of households who said that they received any alert between treatment and control communities. The treatment community here being communities that had access to where we send the alerts to the mukhyas, and control communities where we didn't do that. And what we find is that simply forwarding these alerts to these local leaders doesn't really work, right? So what you see here is 4 sets of bars, one from the Mukhya survey that we did after the 2019 flood season, and the second set of bars is from the household survey we did after the 2019 flood season. What you see here is 2019 was a terrible year for flooding. Close to 95% Mukhyas reported their community was flooded, the same for households. Floods were forecasted, that means forecasts were generated for all of these floods, so it's not like the forecasts were not available. However, when we asked control households if they received alert, close to 55% Mukhyas said they had, and close to 60% households said they had. But the key point here is that it's not that the treatment households were more likely to say that they received an alert, right? They were as likely to say they received an alert, so it's not like the intervention had an impact. The intervention didn't really translate into treatment households being more likely, or treatment household Mukhyas being more likely to receive an alert, which suggests that Mukhyas just didn't pay attention to these alerts that we were sending. Even though at the start of the flood season, we had told them that they would be receiving these alerts from us via WhatsApp and SMS, it seemed like it didn't really translate and capture their attention, and definitely didn't lead to dissemination within the community, okay? So the second thing we did, this was post-COVID, that we designed a last mile delivery that relied on community agents who are, basically what we did was we recruited 2 to 3 community agents, we trained them, and then we paid them to disseminate alerts generated by CWC in 2022, because Google's system was not operational in 2022, and then Google's flood alerts between 23 and 25. So essentially, we asked them to disseminate these alerts via both traditional modes of communication, like loudspeakers and flags, as well as more modern modes of communication, like SMS and WhatsApp, right? So we trained them before each flood season the last 4 years, 22, 23, 24, 25, to understand what these alerts are saying, to create WhatsApp groups within the community, to create SMS groups within the community. We provide them with loudspeakers and flags to do dissemination across their community for 5 months every year, right? So the flood season in Bihar lasts from June to October. So every year for the past 4 years, for 5 months, we've been paying them to like do this sort of last mile dissemination. And because the flood season is 5 months, there might be multiple events, flood events for a single community within those 5 months. And in each flood event, basically what we ask these agents to do is send multiple alerts. The first set of alerts they send are these warning alerts as the water levels start to rise. The second set of alerts they send are these severe alerts that transition once the water level is predicted to breach the danger mark. They send these severe alerts, and then as the water level starts coming back down, again, they transition back to sending warning alerts. This is a picture of one of our community agents hoisting like a red flag, which indicates a severe alert being forecasted for the community. And this is a picture of the SMS or the WhatsApp message being sent by our community agent to people in the community about river waters and what they are projected to be in the next 24 hours. Okay, so before I show you the results, let me just first tell you that when we asked people if they would be willing to pay for a flood delivery service that just provided them with flood alerts via SMS and WhatsApp, turns out a lot of people were willing to pay. And this was not like a hypothetical elicitation. This was a high-stakes elicitation where we actually collected money from them. Okay, so these are people who have not been exposed to our delivery mechanism. We just asked them if you would be willing to pay for a flood alert delivery service where you would be informed about alerts via SMS and WhatsApp. Okay, theoretically for things that they already have access to. Right? They should already have access to CWC's alerts. They should already have access to Google's alerts. Turns out a lot of them were willing to pay. 60% said they would be willing to pay for this sort of delivery service via WhatsApp and SMS. And they would be willing to pay 66 rupees, which is a non-trivial amount for one season in terms of like getting access to these alerts via WhatsApp and SMS. Again, these are alerts that are already available to them, but they're paying for the delivery model, which tells you that they are not getting access to these alerts, right? Okay, so now let me tell you about our results. To conduct the evaluation for this community agent model, what we did was, as any reasonable development economist would do, we ran a randomized control trial. Sample was 319 panchayats or communities across 12 Bihari districts, highlighted in that map right there. We randomly assigned 160 communities to receive the intervention, which was these community agents I described to you. And the control communities did not get these community agents. So the only difference between the treatment and control communities was the fact that the treatment communities had access to these community agents. Both the treatment and control had access to like whatever baseline flood early warning system is available, whether it be CWCs, Google's, or any sort of informal system that's out there. Okay, the only thing that's different between the treatment and control communities is the fact that in treatment communities, we recruited these 2 to 3 community agents who did the last mile delivery. Okay, and then to get at outcomes, we conducted these in-person survey with 5,500 households every year after the flood season for the past 4 years. Okay, so what we find is that this sort of delivery model has seemed to have worked. It increased access to alerts, and treatment households were much more likely to receive any alert. So what you see here is a comparison between control and treatment groups for the last 4 years, and you see that in each of the years, treatment households are much more likely to receive any alerts compared to control households. So for example, let's take 2025. In 2025, 50% of control households said that they received any alert, compared to 64% treatment households. So that's a 14 percentage point difference. Off a base of 50%, that's quite a big percentage impact, okay? They're also much more likely to receive, a far greater number of alerts in treatment communities compared to control communities. So again, this effect is visible across the 4 years. In 2025, control households received 5 alerts across the flood season. Treatment households received more than 15 alerts. These alerts were also much more timely. We asked households when they received the alerts, and treatment households were much more likely to receive alerts before the floodwaters entered the community. So if you look at 2025 again, 45% control households said that they received alerts before the water reached their home. This percentage was 60% for treatment households. So that's again a 15 percentage point difference. So not only did treatment households have access to these alerts were much more timely, which is great. So as I said, these models try to minimize false negatives or instances of there being a flood, but there not being a alert. And this is what you see in the data as well. If you look at, these are differences in terms of like false negatives in each of the 4 flood seasons. And what you see, for example, in 2025, 28% control households said that they did not receive alerts, but they say their community was impacted by flooding. that percentage is far lower in the treatment group. In the treatment group, around 10% treatment, 18% treatment households said that they didn't receive alerts even though they were impacted by flooding, right? So treatment households are less likely to not receive an alert when they were subjected to a flood. Okay, however, as I said, there's a trade-off. The trade-off being if you try to minimize false negatives, there are a few more false positives, and that's what you see as well. You will see that treatment communities are much more likely to report receiving an alert, but not report receiving floods. So for example, in 2025, 4% of control households reported receiving alerts despite there not being any flooding. That percentage is much higher in the treatment group. In the treatment group, close to 12% households say that they received an alert even though there's no floods. And this is important, right? So if you get exposed to false positive, that might decrease your trust in the system, and next year you receive an alert, you might be less likely to take action, right? So it's also, when you think about evaluation for these programs, relying on just the one-shot evaluation or one-year evaluation doesn't get at these like long-term impacts, which are mediated through trust in the system, right? And thankfully, what I'll show you is that even despite these false positives, treatment groups or treatment households perceived that these alerts were much more accurate compared to the control group, and they also trusted these alerts more. So, which is good. So this is the results I was talking about. So here you have perception of these alerts. So we didn't ask this question in 22. If you look at 2025, it says that 34% control households perceived alerts as highly accurate. That percentage is much higher in the treatment group. In the treatment group, that number is closer to 45%. So again, close to a 13 percentage point effect, which is again large off a base of around 34%. So despite these false positives, these alerts were perceived to be quite accurate in the treatment group relative to the control group, and they were also, treatment households were much more likely to trust these alerts, which is important for like any sort of these AI-based forecasts. You're not asked, people are being asked to take very costly adaptive action here. It's not, they're being asked to like use sandbags or store drinking water and food. These are like not costless adaptive actions that they have to take in response to flood alerts. So it's very important that they trust these alerts to be able to take these expensive steps. And what we see here is that treatment group households are much more likely to trust alerts despite the false positives compared to control households. Okay. And so this is the latter set of results. So here we find that treatment households are much more likely to take action in response to the alerts. So they trust these alerts more, they perceive them, they're accurate, and they take action. So what are the actions they're taking? They're stocking food, so they're 6% more likely to stock food before flooding. They 13% more likely to ensure drinking water access. They use sandbags, so they're 22 percentage point more likely compared to control groups to sandbag their house to protect themselves from flooding. And then they take health-related precautionary measures, so 8% increase. So these alerts in the treatment group that are being disseminated, they're being trusted, and people are acting on these alerts to protect themselves, okay? And then finally, before I end, let me show you this result, which is like, I think, related to this theme of AI, which this conference is about. What we also find is that the treatment group, because they were exposed to these highly accurate flood warnings, they changed their perceptions of science and technology more broadly. And they increased their trust in science and technology more broadly, which is super interesting, especially because this is a context when you ask people, do people these days rely more on science and technology than they should? A vast majority, close to 90% said yes. This is a population that feels that we rely too much on science and technology and not enough on faith. So in that context, what we show is that treatment households, because they were exposed to this sort of like delivery mechanism that gave them access to these highly accurate flood warnings, they changed or updated their perceptions of science and technology more broadly, and they increased their trust in science and technology more broadly. Okay, so this is 55% control households said that they changed their perception of science and technology after flooding. That was much higher in the treatment group, statistically significantly so. There's a 3 percentage point difference, or a 6 percentage difference in change in perception of science and technology in the control group, in the treatment group relative to the control group, and this is in the positive direction, which is like super exciting. So let me just end here in the last minute I have. AI-based flood forecasts are amazing. They're highly accurate, as I said. They are timely, and they provide information that people actually need and want. However, just because you're generating forecasts that are accurate, that doesn't automatically translate to impacts. To get at impacts, you actually make sure that people get these alerts, people get the fruits of these AI forecasts, and you can only do that once you get last mile delivery right. And we tested a couple of last mile delivery models, one that didn't work, that leveraged local leaders for dissemination, one that did work, leveraged community agents, who we incentivized to do the dissemination. That seemed to work really well. And it's also widely scalable. The Indian government already does a lot of like last mile delivery while like community agents embedded in like rural India. So it's not like we're doing something very unique. It's also very scalable. Okay, so, and then broadly, the last thing which is relevant for this conference is like, when people experience these accurate forecasts, that changes their perception of science and technology more broadly and makes them trust science and technology more broadly. So we're excited to like delve into like spillover effects as well. So I'll end here. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Maulik, for the wonderful talk. Please remain on stage for a group photo with the rest of the session speakers. I would like to now invite on stage Veena Srinivasan to steer the panel. Veena is the Executive Director of Well Labs, which aims to translate scientific research into real-world impact by designing solutions that create livelihoods while conserving the environment. Well Labs will develop advanced models for village-level water scarcity insights, which have been funded by APAC Sustainability Seed Fund 2.0. A fun fact, Veena has served as a judge for Bezos Earth Fund, $100 million AI for Climate and Nature Challenge. Next, I would like to invite Niriksha Shetty, who serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Precision Development, an organization which is harnessing data-driven innovation to support smallholder farmers. Precision Development is leading a number of AI-based climate and agriculture initiatives, including message design for AI weather forecasting program reaching 38 million Indian farmers. Fun fact, Nirishka has previously been a member of the JPAL South Asia team. Our next panelist is Fatima Al-Mullah, Senior Specialist, International Affairs Office at the UAE Presidential Court. Her work bridges policy innovation and investment to transform food systems at scale. The UAE Presidential Court and the Gates Foundation are collaborating on AI ecosystem for global agriculture development that seeks to use advanced technology to help farmers adapt quickly to extreme weather and give them access to the tools needed to cultivate a better future for the communities they support. A fun fact, Fatima has been recognized as Emirati Women Achievers, as one of the Emirati Women Achievers in 2023 for her impactful contributions. Finally, we have George Richards. George is the director of Community Jameel, an independent global organization advancing science to help communities thrive. Community Jameel is a partner of JPAL in the AI Evidence Alliance for Social Impact, an initiative driving evidence-informed deployment of AI solutions for social good in Africa and Asia. A fun fact about George is that beyond his work in Community Jameel, George is an established leader on cultural heritage protection and has served as a special rapporteur for cultural heritage to the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq. If you would like to ask our panelists questions, please scan the QR code on the screen.
Thank you so much. Welcome to this panel on AI for climate and agriculture. And specifically, we're going to be looking at impact evaluation evidence around AI applications in this space. So as we've been discussing all day, measurement is really important to ensure that AI interventions are effective. They don't result in a waste of resources. They don't have unintended consequences. And impact evaluation, whether through RCTs or other types of impact evaluation, are really important in generating this sort of evidence and feeding that back into actual program design. So we have three really eminent panelists here, and through the day, we've been seeing some very consistent themes on this exact topic of impact evaluation. We saw this consistent emphasis on trust and humans in the loop and last mile delivery. And then we saw this issue of there's a difference in speed between how fast the AI models are developing, the time it takes to actually put one of these real-world interventions, whether an entire cropping season or building an embankment, the time it takes to actually generate evidence, and then the time it might take for the impacts and unintended consequences to play out, which might be in a decadal time scale. So very consistent messaging through the day. So I'm going to start with all three of you to basically ask a broad question about how AI is actually making its way into your own programming. Fatima, we'll start with you. The government of UAE, of course, has been a global leader in the space of AI, and AI in agriculture and water in particular. And I was wondering whether you could tell us a little bit about the types of investments UAE has been making, how you pick the investments, and maybe a couple of use cases that have really worked.
Sure. Thank you so much, Veena. And first of all, thank you to JPAL for hosting us today. It's really great to be here. Maybe a little bit about the UAE. The UAE has taken a deliberate action and decision to treat AI and embed AI into our own infrastructure. And it's also become part of our national strategy. We're the first country to appoint a Minister of State for AI back in 2017. And in 2019, we launched the Mohammed bin Zayed University of AI, which now ranks one of the top 10 universities in the world for AI. And then we embed AI strategy across the cabinet level as well. So now we're seeing that we also have a cabinet member that is an AI member. And there's a lot of things that have been coming out from what we're doing. Another thing is the UAE's development strategy has also been shifting, and a lot of that is going into agriculture development. So we saw in G20 the announcement of the $1 billion for AI development in Africa. And then later this year, the first phase of the 5 gigawatt AI data center will be launched, which will be used to train and run models, advanced models at a global scale. So we're seeing a lot of exciting things in the UAE. Specifically at the type of work that we do when it comes to agricultural development, one exciting area that we're seeing is Aim for Scale, which was launched with Nobel laureate Michael Kremer, who JPAL knows, of course, very well. And the aim is to create to launch evidence-based, scientifically proven technologies in agriculture that could be scaled at a large level. And we're doing this through several different technologies. We're seeing the AI weather forecasting, and then also in AI digital agriculture services now, as well as AI and livestock. So I think this would be one of the up-and-coming things that's really interesting to see in the development space.
Fantastic. George, in terms of community, Jamil has always had the mission of advancing science to enable and improve community action. And you've focused specifically on food and agriculture for a while. I was wondering if you could talk about how AI is changing your current as well as future programming.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I think that probably the first thing to say, and it was mentioned generously in the introduction, is that at Community Jamil, we're big evidence guys, and we're big JPAL guys, principally. And I think on top of that, we're also increasingly big AI and evidence guys with JPAL. And so we're very proud to be supporting PI, along with the British and Canadian governments, Google.org, of course, and others. And I think all the work that's obviously the focus of today's discussions around evidence for the safe deployment of AI for social good is vitally important. The other thing to know about Community Jamil is we're gluttons for punishment. And we love nothing more than a knotty problem to sink our teeth into. And one of the knotty problems that we've been looking to tackle for a while is this question of the deployment of technologies in agricultural settings. And I'm a huge admirer, not something that we've directly supported, but a huge admirer of JPAL's ATI initiative, the Agricultural Technologies Adoption Initiative, which looks specifically at this question of the adoption of agricultural technologies. And I think that as AI becomes this game-changing technology, which we can all see before us, the question actually is, to some degree, the same as it always has been about the adoption of technologies in agricultural context. It's building trust. It's understanding how these technologies are integrated into existing practices. We've heard a lot today, and Maulik's brilliant presentation about flood warning, I think, demonstrates the importance of last mile delivery, which is another area that we think about a lot. So I think in some ways it's the same as it always has been, but the potential that AI, the promise that AI holds, makes it all the more important. Thank you.
Fantastic. Niriksha, I was wondering if you can tell us from precision development's point of view, what does precision development do in the agriculture and climate space, and then how is AI kind of shaping that?
Thanks, Veena. So there are these amazing evidence-based innovations that exist that can help farmers. Maulik just talked about flood forecasts, but they're not reaching most farmers when they need it in ways that they can actually use. So that's essentially the problem PXD is trying to solve. We're trying to take, this cutting-edge innovation, translate it into digestible material that can reach farmers through channels they already use, simple, easy-to-use technology. And I think the big priority for us is institutionalizing and scaling through government to ensure long-term sustainability. So we've already reached 45 million farmers, working with government partners in India, Ethiopia, Kenya, and so on. But I think why AI is really exciting for us is it can sort of transform the quality of information reaching farmers at scale. And so there's 3 ways we're actively using it. One is referencing both what Maulik and Fatima talked about, which is improving the types of content that are reaching farmers. So things like early warning systems, AI-based weather forecasts, pest prediction systems. So thinking about how can you get farmers information earlier at better granularity and faster and cheaper. The second is targeting advice better. So, the cool thing about these digital technologies is you can learn how farmers engage with these systems, and over time you can target based on their past behavior. And so that's really exciting for us, particularly as different farmers use different channels, have different preferences when it comes to accessing systems. And then the last one is actually making the delivery more engaging and faster. So things like getting voice advisory in local language out to farmers using Gen AI, and those are the types of things we're testing. But for us, we see it very much a vehicle to sort of catalyze scale and impact on things we're already doing.
Great. So I just wanted to encourage you to send questions because I actually am miraculously seeing your questions here. But while we wait for a couple of more questions to come, George, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, which is this question of, because this is an impact evaluation session, so how does Community Jameel actually use evidence, and how do you actually decide? There's a ton of different AI opportunities out there. How do you incorporate evidence into your decision making? What kind of indicators or what kind of theories of change, what kind of outcomes are you looking for in making your decision to say this is the kinds of things we think it's worth, these are promising?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe to give an example of a practical example, we don't. The question that we typically ask ourselves is a simple one, which is, does the technology work, and will it be used, or is it being used, adopted? And I'm always thinking of how we can push the envelope and try to generate evidence of effectiveness and adoption in more extreme settings, in harder to reach communities. And that's, I think, what we have a hunger for when it comes to evidence generation is really those sort of edge case scenarios. As a more concrete example, non-JPAR related, I hesitate to say, is that we support a research center at MIT called the Jameel Clinic, which looks at AI and health. In fact, Professor Ziad Obermeyer, who spoke earlier, is affiliated to the clinic, and they've developed a couple of AI systems, tools for early detection and, in fact, for prediction of breast cancer and lung cancer up to 5 or 6 years before they're typically visible in common practical approaches to screening. And just before coming to India, and I've been on a whistle-stop tour of India from Bangalore to Chennai to Jaipur to Mumbai and finally to Delhi. After hearing Maulik's presentation, I want to add Bihar, but my team said no, too much, enough. Next time. But before that, I was in Egypt, in Upper Egypt, in Luxor. And what you see, the the felucca boats gliding gently along the Nile and the Valley of the Kings, where, of course, they recently discovered Sanskrit and Tamil inscriptions. But far from the beautiful hotels in the Winter Palace, it's actually one of the poorest parts of Egypt, very rural community. And there were, for the longest time, no cancer hospitals. And as a result, cancer outcomes were very unfavorable because people had to, one, save up the money to travel all the way to Cairo to a hospital. There was a huge mental burden of doing that. And inevitably, there was lots of late diagnosis. And as I said, cancer care was poor. And then the community themselves, local people, Egyptians, put their hands in their pockets and built what can only be described as the most impressive state-of-the-art hospital in the middle of nowhere. And I was just there. And into this hospital, we've managed to build a link now with this MIT Gmail clinic to deploy these AI tools. And what's exciting is that the clinicians and the researchers in this hospital are not only sort of taking these tools and deploying them and using them to inform decision-making about it's initially with breast cancer, about women's cancer care, but they're also validating and improving the tools themselves. So there's a genuine research collaboration between the researchers and clinicians in Upper Egypt and their counterparts at MIT. And I think that model of trying to build trust and collaborations with institutions, with partners in harder to reach settings, and then creating the framework and environment for collaborative research to generate evidence that these tools work and how they can best be adopted is critically important.
Fantastic. You've said something very important, which is it's really, there's the really, really difficult to reach populations, and then there's sort of the people who sit in big universities or research centers in the global north or even in India. And basically the speed at which you can close that loop between what's happening in these places with their AI models and what's actually delivered to make a difference on the ground. Now, we've got a bunch of questions that are coming in from the audience that are asking us some really hard questions. And Shobani said I should be really hard on you, so I'm going to be. And one of the questions is that agriculture is hard enough, and many of these farmers' lives are hard enough. What makes us, sitting in this nice auditorium here, believe that people who are barely surviving are going to adopt any of these technologies? So that's one question. And I'm going to read out a second question, which is, for any of these AI models to work really well, you kind of need really high quality data, and we saw data in the previous sets of panels as well. You need high quality data, but more importantly, you need data to not be siloed and fragmented. You kind of need nations, states in India, private sector, civil society to all kind of be sharing data, so you're able to kind of increase quality of the data that goes into developing these models. What hope do we have for being able to generate models, but also induce a fundamental culture shift in the kinds of data that's shared on agriculture and climate? So if you can take both of those questions, why do we think farmers are going to do any of this when they are barely surviving, and then what would it require for data and open data for that to happen? Niriksha, maybe you can start, and then
I'll take the first question. I think when we think of what farmers are trying to do, they're trying to deal with an increasingly changing climate, and most often they're not make decisions to prevent their entire crops from getting wiped out, right? And so traditional know-how helps, but as the climate is rapidly changing, there's better data, better models that can help them make better decisions. And so I think that's where technology can help. It's not about providing a shiny app to change decisions. It's, you can have better decision-making conditions. As long as that information is reaching them in ways that they can actually use, there's still a huge upside from that. So if they can know 3 months out when it's going to rain, or if they can know with enough advance warning when the floods are going to arrive, they're in a position to take preparatory action for that. And so if you think about farming and it essentially being about managing risk, that's where we're seeing the big shifts, even in the evidence, on digital tools being able to help minimize downside risk and protect farmers. So it's not necessarily about introducing some complicated technology that nobody can use. It's about taking these innovations in technology and using them to help farmers optimize better for decisions they're already making.
Fatima, would you like to comment on the data and the open data?
Sure. I think one of the most important things is data ownership. So there needs to people need to feel like they own their data rather than giving it out and it being used for other things. And I think also that when we're building solutions, we're building not for the farmer, but with the farmer. This is something that we mentioned yesterday. Evidence-based also is very important. So when I look at Aim for Scale as an initiative, so far it's been an incredibly successful initiative. We know that people and farmers are being reached in the millions, but what we do with that information, we still don't know. You know, we need to take it, like after listening to my colleague here, I wrote his name down, I forgot, Malik, with the flood forecasting, the granularity of the information that he provided is amazing. We still don't have that. And I think if we're able to do that with AI weather forecasting, with livestock, with any AI product development that we create as an open source, then the likelihood that there will be trust in not just the governments, but also the adoption of the information will increase by far.
Great. George, I was wondering whether you want to comment on that, but I'm going to ask a further follow-up question again based on the questions coming in from the audience. So a couple of them. One of them is there's a couple of questions around barriers to adoption and saying where are we seeing that there are great ideas, but they're getting stuck in pilots. And this is a theme we've been seeing through the day on this issue of barriers to scaling. And the second question on what's kind of missing in the current ecosystem that we think really needs to be solved for. So what, based on, again, the evidence. So we can learn from both failures and successes, but sometimes you learn from failures and you realize that that's actually telling you what's missing in the ecosystem. So I was wondering if you can think a little bit about what's not working well, both in terms of barriers to scaling, but also what's missing in the ecosystem that we're learning from all of this evidence that we think needs to be done.
Yeah, I might pick up on what my colleague said, and then also, I mean, on the scaling question, Fatima's extremely well positioned with Aim for Scale to talk about that. But maybe just to respond to the earlier questions as well. I think that what we've found is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. And in some contexts, well, in all contexts, I think that trust remains this vitally important component to bridging between new technologies and adoption. In Maulik's presentation and the technology he described, it's interesting that it's the community extension officers, for want of a better phrase, who help provide that bridge between the alerts that people were receiving and their action in response to them. In other cases, there's a great JPAL study, I've got it written down here actually, Digital Greens Farmers Chat AI, which is a fantastic piece of kit which allows farmers to kind of take photos of their crops and get advice through a chatbot effectively. But there's another program which we've supported which has got JPAL's fingerprints all over it, which is called the Jameel Observatory CruiseNet, which is operating both in Bangladesh and in Sudan. JPAL's part of the consortium behind it, and it's a Aim for Scale selected project. And in that, they haven't done it's focused on farmers, and it's trying to tackle many of the issues that we see around climate change and the challenges they pose. They're using long-term climate models like 30 years and ahead to help farmers now start to plan for the changing world that they're going to be inhabiting. And that includes through selecting new seeds. But rather than relying on, for example, a chatbot, they've set up these kind of clinics that pop up and allow farmers to come in, bring seeds or leaves and say, what's wrong with this plant? And then there's somebody there who can advise them on what to do differently. And that's how they're starting to build trust. So my point is that there's no one size fits all. It's sort of horses for courses, as we would say. And I think that, but it all goes back to this question of trust as a key component.
Is trust scalable though?
I think it can be.
How do you scale trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the widespread adoption of new technologies, it's that there's in the example that Maulik gave, I think, we talk about scale. It's 3+ million people who have been reached through starting small and in building from the pilot stage to widespread adoption, as you would describe, using a very new piece of kit. So I think that was a great example of how you can scale.
Fatima Jina.
Sure. Maybe I want to touch a little bit also on the scaling. One of the great things that Aim for Scale does, first of all, was created with people who feel the same frustration about technologies not reaching the people that need it the most. They say that every technology that we need to solve every crisis already exists, but we're not putting it in the hands of the right people. And I really believe that being able to institutionalize these technologies and to be able to scale them is so important. So what Aim for Scale has been successful in doing is embedding these evidence-based technologies into the development plans of the development banks so that you can reach as many people as far as possible and really reach the first mile.
Got it. I'm actually going to, the questions here are really fantastic, so I don't know how we're going to get to all of them, but there's a really, really good question, and Riksha, I was wondering whether you could take this. We've talked about AI, and then from my world, which is much more grassroots, people talk about indigenous wisdom and indigenous knowledge and so on. How do those two worlds kind of interact? So how do we move AI from being this black box, which is trained primarily on formal data sets and maybe Western paradigms, with grassroots, and make it respect what indigenous knowledge and what people know, and where do those worlds intersect? Is there a way to,
I think this is back to the point Fatima made, right? Like all these technologies only work when you design with the farmer and when you design for scale. And that often means designing with people farmers trust, so governments, extension workers, and so on. I think a good example of this is when we've tried to send weather information to farmers, and what the AI tells you deviates considerably from what farmers' priors might be for religious reasons. You have to design the information in a way that acknowledges both those realities and anchors the advice on sort of, symbols farmers might look for, or sort of their priors that you have. So that's one. I think the other is this has to be a repeated game of trust. So what we found is, if in the early years, the advice is accurate or, may deviate from their priors, but is actually proving to be helpful, we see engagement with these types of services spike. So I think both making sure that the AI doesn't exist in a silo, but the practical advice that you provide from it anchors on and feeds on these like traditional, indigenous knowledge, and there's this like two-way feedback loop, but then also making sure that over time that cycle of trust builds so you're able to sort of get to this happy medium.
I mean, absolutely. I think that if anybody goes, if I was a farmer and someone came to me and said, I have a technology that's going to change everything, I'm not going to trust them. Like there needs to be this process, this feedback loop, this process where we keep coming back, taking that feedback and putting it into the AI technologies as well. So you have to take it step by step, and we need to also be working to showcase the evidence. So with organizations such as JPAL, for example, this is one area where we could ourselves even improve some of the work that we're doing when it comes to AI digital advisory services. How do I know that what I'm actually building is actually effective? And there's so many layers to that, as we saw with Malik and the flooding forecasting. So I think it's two things. I think it's building the trust, but showing the evidence as well.
Fantastic. So I'm going to have each of you end with sort of one thing that gives you hope and one thing that you think we need to be worried about or design for, so that we're actually protecting, on one hand, developing effective interventions, and then building evidence generation into that, but also protecting the weakest. So Fatima, do you want to start? One thing that's...
I think one thing that gives me hope is that I believe in people, and I believe in the goodness of people, and I really think that if you put the right minds together, you can create something so beautiful, even if it's AI. But one thing that is also the same thing probably that would be something that worries me is what if it reaches and goes into the hands of the wrong people? So I would say it really comes down to the people and the partnerships that you work with.
George.
I take hope from the fact that I think nearly everybody I've heard today has been putting people at the center of the discussion, and great that this panel, I think, has put farmers at the center of this discussion about farming and agriculture. maybe not a cause of despair, but a challenge that we need to tackle is to push the envelope even further to reach even more vulnerable communities. And some folks that we're thinking about a lot at the minute is how to harness AI for post-conflict settings where farmland and agricultural land has been devastated and there's unexploded ordnance, and what can AI do to help tackle that challenge?
Niriksha?
I'm excited by how quickly innovators, governments, public institutions, nonprofits are coming together to scale effective AI-powered information services for farmers. So we're talking already tens of millions. I think what I continue to worry about is who gets left behind and what can we do to make sure to design services that are inclusive, but also what happens when the information is wrong. Have we communicated risk clearly? Have we communicated, like Maulik said, farmers are making big changes in response to this advice. Who takes accountability of that when it goes wrong?
Fantastic. Thank you so much to everybody in the audience. This has been a great panel. Thank you so much. These are fantastic questions, so I hope Jaypal is going to somehow archive them and put them out in some way. But thank you so much.
Thank you, panelists, for that insightful discussion. Please exit through the right.